Good morning and welcome back to Edgier Than Thou, a channel which has basically become a competition with myself to see how long I can keep that channel name before humiliation kicks in. Brief moment of levity aside, today I want to talk to you about the modern conservative movement, specifically the anti-trans or more broadly anti-LGBT movement, and the genuinely horrific goals it seems to have. There is no way that I'm going to cover every single facet of this issue, so if you have questions about it, feel free to ask me about them. I'm going to link sources down in the description. If I'm missing anything, please feel free to clarify. I'm totally open to questions and discussion and whatever, but this is not going to be one where I'm going to tolerate the typical, like, Matt Walsh fan, like, what is a woman comments, you know? This is not the time for that. What I hope to show you in this video is that the modern conservative movement is using explicit extermination rhetoric against the LGBT community. And I know that some of you are probably watching this and ready to scream at your screens because this is so obvious. But unfortunately, in the culture that we exist in today, we have something of a status quo bias and an end of history myth perspective that makes it difficult for folks who aren't already victims of or scholars of this issue to accept that big changes could be happening in the future. Big, very bad changes. With that, if you're already on board with me on this and just want a little bit more evidence or want to see somebody else arguing this in a different way, stick around. If you're a liberal and are skeptical of this idea but curious, again, stick around. And if you're a conservative who fancies themselves open-minded, then please stick around. This is gonna be a fun one. It's not. First, I should probably broadly define the movement that I'm talking about, the anti-trans, anti-LGBT movement. This movement centers itself around a few major points. I'm going to list a few of them here. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but anti-LGBT people tend to focus on a few of the following. 1. LGBT people are ruining science. 2. LGBT people are ruining grammar and language. 3. Gender theory is making cis kids transgender. 4. That gender theory is leading to child abuse, and when I say child abuse, I hope we all know what kind of abuse I'm talking about. It's fairly obvious. I'm trying to keep my language a bit, like, on the DL for YouTube purposes. And 5. If you go deep enough, LGBT degeneracy is destroying Western civilization. This video is not a litigation on trans identity, so I will not be talking about the first points really at all. I'm also not going to focus on the gender theory is making cis kids trans point because it's literally just something that they have no evidence for, and every time that evidence is presented, it's like, it's garbage and whatever. At some point, maybe I'll talk about that in the future, but we can have discussions, respectful discussions about identity and the science behind this, because it is really quite fascinating. Gender is a very interesting topic, but things are really bad now. So if you are someone who is skeptical of transness, I get it. It's a new topic, all right? And we can have that conversation in the future. But right now, trans people are in a lot of danger. So I'm assuming that even if you are skeptical of this whole movement, you probably don't want us all killed. So I'm asking you to put your questions and frustrations and confusions aside for just a little while. Let's quell the movement that is growing here, and then I will be happy to have conversations about this with you. Not because I need to argue my identity, but because I think it's an interesting topic, and I want people to learn more about it. It is also important to note that I will be talking about this movement as a broad, overarching movement. So when I say they, I'm not talking about any one specific individual, all right? I'm talking about the right-wing anti-LGBT movement in general. I think that's important. This isn't some nebulous, they want you to do this or that or whatever. There are actors in the conservative machine that do not fulfill every single point that I'm going to lay out here. However, the fact that no major conservative figures, as far as I can tell, are ostracizing each other over these points basically means that even if you aren't actively saying this stuff, the fact that you are constantly friends with and retweeting and supporting the people who are saying this stuff, you're on their side. Now, to argue that the right-wing movement is intentionally using extermination rhetoric against the LGBT movement, I need to define exactly what I'm going to argue to you. Number one, that their goal is not to protect kids. This is a really important one because I can see myself and a lot of other people siding with a movement that I disagree with, specifically because obviously, like, they're protecting the most vulnerable people in our society. So it's important to show that their motivations are corrupt. Their concern is not with protecting kids. So if that's the thing that you're afraid of and the reason why you're siding with them, there are better ways to do that. 2, They want to criminalize existing as a trans person in society. They want to literally make it illegal to be a trans person and live your life to the fullest. And 3, they're making an active attempt to label LGBT people with death-warranting labels. What I mean by that is that they're attempting to label this community as people who deserve death based on other labels that they've attached to it. In fact, in my opinion, and I'm not going to discuss this a whole lot further, I do think that the anti-LGBT movement, anti-trans movement are kind of already an attempt at a shield from what the original intention of a lot of these conspiracy theories are, which is anti-Semitism, right? You can't, or at least up until recently, you weren't really able to say explicit, open, active anti-Semitic things on national television and expect to not get pushback. So a lot of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are now shunted onto a new group, and then because, of course, you also can't call for the same stuff for that group, then you're basically fighting like an Inception proxy war here. But I'm arguing here, talking about specifically the trans movement. So without further ado, part 1, protecting children. So it's no secret that in the United States of America, there are a lot of individual people who explicitly, actively want to harm children, but the vast, vast majority of us support some form of law enforcement in order to stop these people and get them out of the community or get them the rehabilitation they deserve, depending on the severity of whatever crime they're trying to commit. But obviously, the right isn't really talking about that, right? They're talking about a cultural thing. They're talking about the LGBT movement in general being a cultural push towards harming children. So it's important to look at the culture we already have, the culture that the right seems to support, to see if they're not already doing these things. Now again, this is not about a whataboutism. This is not about a, you're accusing us of something, so what about this thing that you're doing? The reason this is important is because there are a multitude of very easy child protection wins that the right could get if their goal was to protect kids. Obviously, fighting the trans battle has been difficult for them, but as you're going to see in a moment, there are movements that they could absolutely kick ass and the Democrats wouldn't put up any resistance whatsoever, and they're not doing them. For starters, child beauty pageants. Child beauty pageants have been a pretty gross and creepy way of like putting our children on display and living vicariously through them in oftentimes explicitly sexual manners, so much so that It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia did an episode on it in which there were not 1 but 2 active child predators attempting to infiltrate the event. It's no secret that child beauty pageants lead to a ton of harm to the children who aren't even explicitly abused in the system. But again, this is a system full of child abuse and neglect. Now, the reason this is important is because, as far as I can tell, conservative figures are not making a big fuss about this, despite the fact that, I'm sorry, I do not think that if the right went hard against child beauty pageants, the left would put up any resistance. I've linked a tweet thread from Merrick DeVille, I'm assuming that's how that name is pronounced, and a study that goes over several of the harms that happen to children who aren't even explicitly abused in this system, just to demonstrate just how bad it is. Beauty pageants are seemingly a staple of American culture that the right seems to just tacitly endorse, despite saying that their entire movement is about protecting children. Second, and perhaps even more insidiously, child marriage. Child marriage in the United States, which in many locations is made up primarily of adults marrying children, is most common in southern red states and California. Thanks, California. Notably, one of the most common places in the union for child marriage is Matt Walsh's home state of Tennessee. Why am I bringing up some guy named Matt apropos of nothing? We'll see in a moment. In states such as Idaho, marriages have happened to children as young as 13, and in some states, this has literally been a get-out-of-jail-free card for child predators. You know how in movies and TV, sometimes characters who want to commit a crime will make a plan to marry each other so they, can't be convicted of the same crime, or so they don't have to testify against each other? Yeah, this is that, but for child predators. But not only that, this would be an incredibly easy win. In places such as Matt's home state of Tennessee, the people proposing anti-child marriage legislation are the Democrats, and the people voting it down are Republicans. This would be an easy win. If you want to protect children, and you are a conservative, this should be a no-brainer. But somehow, this is not the center of their movement. If this Save the Children movement actually wanted to save the children, this practice would be over by now. But instead, this conservative movement seems to like to focus on the incredibly minor problem of all ages drag shows. But let's pretend for a moment that drag shows are even a problem, despite them showing virtually no evidence of this issue. This would be like watching a hurricane tearing through your city and deciding now is the time to enact legislation to protect people from kitchen fires. If you cared about protecting kids, you would go for the easy, low-hanging fruit immediately. But you haven't. have you. This isn't really relevant to the broader movement, but Matt Walsh in particular has shared some views that I think might elucidate why he doesn't care so much about child marriage.
Girls between the ages of like 17 and 24 is when they're technically most fertile.
Yeah.
Okay? That's biological. That's a fact, all right? I'm just stating facts. That's all I'm doing. So what I'm saying is that the problem is not per se teenage pregnancy. It's unwed pregnancy. That's the problem in society. It's only problematic when you are not married and you don't have the man there to help you take care of the kids because he's a coward.
But since that specific view I don't see as being super indicative of the broader movement, I'm not going to lay into it too hard here. Just know, yeah, he's a creepy dude. But who is this Matt Walsh guy that I keep bringing up? Why is he important to all of this? Well, that brings me to part 2. They want to criminalize trans existence. Matt Walsh is an incredibly popular conservative figure with millions of followers who is trending on Twitter virtually every single day. And he believes that transition should be illegal. Not just for kids, but for adults as well. Here he is tweeting about it. Here's a clip of him saying it should be illegal for adults to transition medically.
Should trans surgery be banned for adults too? Yeah, I mean, I think it should be, yes.
And just for funsies, here's a clip of him saying that trans people literally don't exist.
Is it actually possible for a person to be transgender? Is that a valid, a legitimate, a coherent kind of human identity? Or is transgender, trans, it means beyond gender. You're beyond it. You're something past it, beyond it. Is it possible to be that? The answer is no.
But another important figure in this discussion is Jordan B. Peterson, one of the few conservative figures who I would say actually has more reach right now than Matt Walsh, although I could be wrong on that. Now, Jordan B. Peterson has sold millions of books, vastly more followers than even Matt Walsh, and at one point was a well-respected psychologist, which lends him a degree of legitimacy when he says the things that he says. Peterson was fairly recently suspended from Twitter for a tweet calling the physician who gave Elliot Page a mastectomy a criminal. Notably, this tweet in question was also retweeted by at least Dave Rubin. That was the only person that I could find it retweeted by, so there's another conservative figure tacitly endorsing this. And here's a clip of him responding to that controversy, comparing this surgeon to the likes of Joseph Mengele.
It is clearly the case that the surgical operation performed by the butchers who butchered Elliot/Ellen was legal. So, was it criminal or not? Were the operations undertaken by the fascist physicians who carried out the Nazi medical experiments legal? Yes, under the laws of the time. But were they criminal? I'll leave that question up to you to answer.
What this means is the 2016 days of I don't agree with it, but adults can do whatever they want with their own bodies are over. The right has steadily escalated from rude humor to sneering disapproval to active calls for criminalization. I'll discuss it further in a future segment, but this upward trend should be fairly obvious to you. So now, part 3. Death warranting labels. Now, I want you to consider for a second that you are a genocidal maniac and that your goal right now is to convince the broader populace that one segment of the population should be exterminated. How might you go about that? It's hard to make active calls for genocide, but if you can liken that group to a group of people that most people already agree should be killed, then you can get the general population to do that work for you. You don't need to convince them that these people need to be killed because they've already convinced themselves. And that's where the term groomer comes in. Now, groomer is a legitimate term used to describe actual child predators. And as a result, I don't want to pretend like it shouldn't exist at all. But on the right, this term has been used explicitly to refer to anything even remotely gender-bending in the general vicinity of children. Here's the anti-trans organization Gays Against Groomers, who we'll get back to in a little bit here, saying that drag events including kids are inherently sexual and calling people who organize these events, you know, the P word. And here's Mr. Walsh again saying that drag is inherently sexual, which, to be clear, it just isn't.
Family-friendly drag shows, quote-unquote, have two purposes. One, from the drag queen's perspective, is to satisfy their fetish for cross-dressing in front of children.
Of course, it would follow from this that anyone who even thinks about doing this in the vicinity of kids would be the P word. And here's Walsh claiming that being trans in public is forcing people to participate in a sexual fantasy, which I shouldn't have to elaborate on. I think you can see where this is going.
But then there's the older men who are adults and decide one day that they're women. And for so many of them, this is a fetish. I mean, this is like the thing we're not allowed to say or acknowledge, but it's totally true. And so now we have to participate in your fetish. Like you get off on the idea of being seen as a woman.
Forgot to include this while I was recording originally, but this is an article by the Babylon Bee, a conservative joke fake news site. I've covered them before on here, although I'll probably go back to them again and be a little bit more eloquent about it. But this one is called New Disney CEO Promises to Make Child Grooming Slightly Less Obvious. This article was retweeted by Ben Shapiro plus thousands of other people and probably a couple of other conservative figures. It was difficult for me to parse through it all. But in case you were laboring under the illusion that groomer meant freaking anything to these people, literally making movies we don't like makes you a groomer. I think it probably goes without saying, I don't think you need me to evidence the claim that the general conservative attitude towards that type of person is that they should die. It's not the most helpful one when you're actually trying to protect children, but again, it's understandable, and I'm not going to argue a ton about it. You can read some of the sources down in the description. There are better ways to keep kids safe, but I get it. I get why you want to kill child predators. I understand. You're not out of your mind for feeling that way. But as I've shown here, and as I will show even more in further segments, mainstream conservative figures with millions of followers are in support of the idea that just by virtue of being a trans or gender non-conforming person in public, you are one of those people, one of those predators. Based on this information, you have to conclude one of two things. Either the conservative movement has put absolutely zero thought into this and don't realize how their ideas intersect with one another, or I'm right, and they just want trans people dead. As far as I can tell from that information alone, there isn't a third option. So the information I've already provided, along with maybe some more supporting examples, I think should be enough to show you that at the bare minimum, some conservative figures do want members of the LGBT community gone, removed from the population. But it goes further than that. But before I get to that, I do want to really briefly go back and touch on the anti-Semitism aspect again, because as it turns out, the right hasn't really changed up a lot of their signature moves. So back in the Weimar Republic and into Nazi Germany, one of the most pervasive Nazi narratives was the idea that members of the Jewish community were promoting degeneracy and through myriad methods promoting the end or the destruction of Western civilization. As it turns out, that idea has not died in the slightest. Now, the way that they promote this idea is slightly different. They use the term cultural Marxism now, whereas back in the day, the term tended to be cultural Bolshevism, two terms that describe very, very similar concepts, one of which was literally invented by the Nazis. And the other one is a term that the right just conveniently uses these days for entirely non-racist reasons, I promise, guys. But let me give you a couple of examples of how nowadays they are promoting the idea that gender ideology or transgenderism is promoting the end of Western civilization or of degeneracy in general. The collapse of Western civilization in 2 viral videos. Gender ideology is corrupting the West. Wokeness is destroying America. Leftists want to destroy Western civilization. Is Western culture American culture is in a state of degeneracy. The radical left's crusade against Western civilization. Wake up call to the twisted, evil, woke Blue's cult. Clues teaches degeneracy. The left is destroying Western civilization. While this point is definitely not as viscerally emotional as the previous one, I think it should be pretty clear that a group of people whose goal is to destroy your entire civilization are probably a group of people that you would want to excise from your community. They're probably people that you would want to find some way to get rid of. So yet again, this is another coded death warranting label. So now we need to talk about recent events and the shooting at Club Q in Colorado Springs, which left 5 people dead and 18 wounded. See, I understand if some of the stuff that I've said in this video feels a little bit hypothetical, so let's put this into practice. Let's see how the right responded to an explicit hate crime against the LGBT community. I feel safe calling this a hate crime. All of the evidence that I've seen suggests that. The fact that they're pushing hate crime charges again suggests that. The sudden new claimed identity of the shooter, assuming that this is a new claimed identity, which again, all evidence seems to point to, is irrelevant. The killer may well be non-binary. That has legitimately no effect on whether or not this was a hate crime. To conservatives, this should be obvious since they're constantly accusing men of being anti-male and white people of being anti-white. So it's possible for a trans person to be anti-trans. Let's get over that. Club Q, which was claimed by one of the shooting's victims to be the only safe space for LGBT people in Colorado Springs, was going to host an all-ages drag event. And not that this even matters, but as far as I can tell from their website, anyone under 18 who wanted to come to this event was going to have to bring a parent or guardian. So know that they were not enticing children to show up alone to this creepy club event. That was not happening. Usually, conservative figures respond to hate crimes like this with heartfelt disavowal. They usually claim that events like these are heavily weighing on their hearts and that they hope that stuff like this never happens again. But instead, the right and disaffected liberal Tim Pool had a different response. Instead, they claimed that this violence was the responsibility of the LGBT community, that hate crimes against LGBT people are going to continue as long as the community continues being groomers. Here's Tim Pool implying that the violence against Club Q was justified because they were going to host an all-ages drag brunch, or sorry, a grooming event. Here's the founder of Gays Against Groomers going on Tucker Carlson, one of the largest shows in the country, to claim the same thing.
And unfortunately, you know, the tragedy that happened in Colorado Springs the other night, you know, it was expected and predictable. We all, within Gays Against Groomers, saw this coming from a mile away. Yeah. And sadly, I don't think it's going to stop until we end this evil agenda that is attacking children.
Trump lawyer Jenna Ellis claimed that the victims of this shooting were burning in hell. And here's our good friend Matt Walsh getting in on the victim blaming.
According to the left, the drag queen child combination has become dangerous. They say it's a lightning rod for violent backlash. Right? That's what they say. And it's greatly exaggerated, of course. Mostly it's invented out of whole cloth, actually. But even by their version of events, if it's causing this much chaos and violence, why do you insist on continuing to do it?
Seeing all of that, I want you to take a step back for a minute and imagine what life was like in 2015, 2016. What was the narrative around trans people back then on the right? Usually it was what I mentioned before. They're silly and strange, we don't agree with them, but they should be allowed to do whatever they want. Is that still the narrative? Is that still what they're saying? No. The right had to ramp things up. When trans people first became a major part of the political zeitgeist, the right wing, or at least the mainstream right wing, couldn't immediately call them sadistic monsters. They had to start small. Well, look where it's gotten us. 6, 7 years later, and now, apparently killing them is justified. The message is so clear they have literally spelled it out. They want this to happen again. They believe this is going to happen again because the gays deserve it. This is, in no uncertain terms, genocide rhetoric. I can't claim to explicitly predict the future, but if they continue on the trajectory that they are on, and they continue to gain political power, it is not difficult to envision what they might do next. If they're willing to play defense for a mass murderer, they're already 80% of the way there. This isn't just some fringe neo-Nazi movement anymore. This is the mainstream right-wing movement. All of these people, Tucker Carlson, Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, Michael Knowles, Andrew Klavan, Charlie Kirk, Dennis Prager, Tim Pool, Candace Owens, Ye West for some reason, Donald Trump, and so many others are on the same page. They're friends with each other. They retweet each other. They defend each other. They go on each other's shows. It is not hard to see that this movement is in lockstep. These people have millions of followers, subscribers, supporters, and avid defenders. This is not some small movement that we can turn a blind eye to. Now, you're probably hoping that I have some sort of a grand solution for you, and I really don't. There are people out there with better solutions than I have, and I would encourage you to look into them. If I find content creators, videos, articles, essays, anything like that, I will happily either link them in the description or put them in a pinned comment if you have any recommendations. What I can say, and I know that this is like the most liberal possible solution I can give you, please, for the love of God, go vote. I know for most of Americans, due to the Electoral College, it feels like your vote doesn't really matter in national elections, but in local elections it does. And sometimes major national decisions and elections come down to local areas. Your local sheriff, the people certifying your elections, your local school board trustees are important. For one small example, just recently in Idaho, an honest-to-God groyper, read neo-Nazi, nearly became a school board trustee. He barely lost. And if decent people hadn't gotten out and voted, he would have won. Local elections are often decided by tens, hundreds, to potentially thousands of votes. These are numbers that you can sway. These are numbers that you can get out there and participate in. Is voting going to solve everything? Almost certainly not. I mean, maybe we'll get incredibly lucky. Maybe we'll get a fantastic president in the next election and they're going to blow through the midterms and everything is going to be great. I would love that. But that's not a long-term solution. So now, if you didn't already know about this movement, you know now. And you now get to decide how history looks back on you. Thank you all for sticking around to the end. This was obviously like a really dark one. But if you like generally what I'm doing or are curious about what I'm doing, I appreciate any support that I can get out of it, you know, like liking and subscribing. I mean, those are the two things, liking and subscribing, and I guess like commenting. I appreciate if you were skeptical of what I had to say here and listen to the end. I'd be happy to clarify any confusion. I make no claims to being the perfect orator of a generation. I'm just very passionate about this, and I'm very worried about the direction that we're going. So with that, thank you, and I will hopefully see you all in the next one.